Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today, and it's my honor to bring back somebody who has really learned to channel their superpower by getting out of their own way and allowing people to feel inspired when they walk away from her teaching sessions or one of her musical performances. Inspiration to continue the journey forward in a very unknown time. The inspiration to move forward and be themselves. And ultimately, the inspiration to move them forward and push themselves out of their comfort zone so that they can continue to grow and reap the benefits of this life, and continuing to try to transcend the cycle of birth and death, which is a struggle for many, many people. And in this day and age, with overpopulation and climate change and really a lean towards autocracy in the world at large, it takes people like my guest to make differences in her life so that then it spreads out in a vibrational way and has an effect, the intended effect, on more and more and more people. That's all we can do, is affect positive change in our world. Reema, Datta, an honor to welcome you back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. It's so good to be back. Thanks for having me.
You know, can you just talk a little bit about how you learned to improvise in music? I mean, you know, nobody is going to... I'm not saying you are, some major jazz musician or things like that, but when I go to musical performances, I mean, even if it is something like kirtan or, some kind of, I just cannot handle to see a formula trip, meaning like the musicians already know what they're going to play, what the next note is. And then they go through something that is basically to pacify. This is my opinion. I just feel like music, not all, but a lot of people, because they're afraid to make a mistake, they create a formula so that it's all very protected and they don't have to worry about imperfection. But Reema, I mean, I always see imperfection as perfection. I mean, already in the first 3 minutes, I've already been bumbling over my words, but there's some magic in there, and I'm totally cool with that.
Sure.
And so I just wanted to know from you how you have learned to become comfortable sort of in the void, enjoying improvisation, either with your voice or instrumentally.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It makes me actually appreciate what the gift life has given me, in the sense that what I've been exposed to. I've been learning about neuroscience and how neuroscientists have discovered what they call mirror neurons, where if we have observed someone see something, then we're more likely to do it ourselves.
Wow.
And growing up in India, or within an Indian family and surrounded by Indian music, if you're familiar with Indian classical music, there's so much improvisation that happens. And it's so exciting to go to concerts, because you just watch these musicians improvise together, and just create so much magic. And of course, there's the framework, like what scale are we going to do this song in? But most of it, once that framework is established, is just improvisation. And so just, as you asked me that question, I started to appreciate how many concerts I went to as a child. And also in my adult life, I had the incredible blessing to spend 1 year living in Varanasi, India, which is, the musical capital of India.
Right.
I had an incredible music teacher there. And at the time, I was actually studying tabla, one of the Indian drums. And my teacher, he knew all the musicians in the city. And I would say at least 2, 3, 4 times, 4 nights a week, he would take me to concerts. And
Can you just talk, because
whether it
they
was
are, I
vocal,
mean, I just really want to
yeah,
ask you because, like, I mean, I've talked to friends that have spent time there, and it would
hmm,
just be in somebody's maybe some. It would start at night. In some cases, they'd be in somebody's living room, and they'd offer you
yeah,
cookies, tea, but it would go on all
sure,
night. Like it would just
yeah,
never. It
hmm,
was like that is not that's not a concert in the West where you doors open at 8 o'clock.
right,
You're done by 11:30 and you go
yeah,
home. So the entire. I
yeah.
mean, you just was that the were you was that the first time you were actually seeing live music, or did you go see live music when you were a kid as well?
I saw some live music as a kid, but that year in Varanasi, I was just rich with music
Mm.
and concerts, and a lot of like what you're saying, house concerts, and even public concerts were intimate, and in India, there's no line between spirituality and music. They just go together. They go hand in hand, and you really feel that because the musicians, I think that's why they can improvise the way they do, because they have such a deep spiritual practice, and there's not that fear of tapping into the unknown. There's that trust in themselves and in spirit, and it's like a spiritual practice and experience too, whether you're making the music or listening to the music.
I mean, can you personalize it a little bit in terms of like, I mean, amongst your many credits, it says you're a musician, and so
Hmm.
can you talk about uh, some things that you do or that you've learned to be how you've grown as an improvisational instrumental or even in chanting, where um, yeah, where you sort of uh, you know you gotta sort of throw the fishing rod, cast it into the sea, and hope for the best. I mean,
Hmm.
or maybe
Yeah.
not. Maybe it's like I mean, maybe you just want that structure, or just have you? Is that something that you've
Hmm.
that you've worked on as far as just sort of like
Hmm.
I guess it's called spontaneous composition, Reema.
Right. As you asked me that question, I just feel this flood of appreciation for the teachers I've had, the music teachers I've had, and with Indian classical music as well as Western classical, because I have studied both. And I feel like my teachers gave me such a solid and amazing foundation that it's given me that ability and, courage to go for improvisation because I have that foundation and my teachers gave me that. So I feel grateful, for them that they gave me the foundation, and especially the Indian musicians I've spent time with also helped me plant those seeds of improvising and just seeing their grace and their beauty to do that. And I feel, sometimes I don't know if it's just in the West more or just in general. Sometimes we see things as so black and white. Like I notice this in the yoga world when I teach. Some people are really turned off by teachers and they're, like everything is within. I don't need a teacher. And I understand how some people can feel that because there has been, you know, power trips with teachers and abusive situations. And I see how sometimes in the collective people are turned off by teachers and like we can just do everything by ourselves. And so that just that's hard for me to sit with completely because I've had I've had such great experiences with my teachers. I've just been blessed, so I see the truth on both sides that teachers are such a blessing and they
No, I
give
want to
us
I want to
that,
ask you about this. Is so
you know.
important because my
Yeah.
teachers in the Tao, I love them very
Mhm.
much, and they have a way of
Mhm.
teaching the Tao that is I mean, it's different than what you might read, or what you. There's just not a lot of information on the Tao to begin with, but like Lao Tzu,
Yeah.
like the way
Mhm.
it's a different style, but
Mhm.
and so sometimes I get jealous or resentful to
Mm.
my teacher
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
I just feel like they have more purity in some ways. And the jealousy comes in because I'm like, I can't ever get to that point. That being said, and I'm
Mm.
just talking about in the way that they clean the shrine and the way that the humbleness of it and
Uh-huh.
their lack of material. It's just, and they don't
Yeah.
flaunt it. But I want to talk. I
Mhm.
want you to talk to people, not people that have that have been unfortunately hurt or heard about teachers that abuse themselves. That is kind of a that's real, but it's also kind of a
Yeah.
it's tangential. I'm talking about the people that have so
Mhm.
much armor or so much
Mhm.
pride or whatever the right word is, jealousy, that why they shouldn't be threatened by having a teacher.
Mm. I mean, and for me, I see teachers as such a blessing. It's like instead of jealousy, we turn that around and our tradition, because if we see a teacher that exemplifies beautiful qualities, then it's actually back to science, back to mirror neurons. That it's such a blessing to have a teacher who has amazing qualities, because if we have the opportunity to witness them, then we're more likely to become them. Like if we don't even have the example, if we've never even seen what's possible, then we're much less likely to become that, you know? And so it's like jealousy just it doesn't even cross my mind. It's just like how amazing that I can even witness
No, but yeah,
something
okay. So
so
like, I want to give.
incredible.
Let's just go. Let's just do a hypothetical. Like, I am
Okay.
like you are my teacher, and I am I feel like I know I have a lot of imperfections, and I'm not following. I'm not cultivating the way I should, and
Hmm.
you know, so I feel insecure, or I feel like that I'm just, and I project that out on you and
Hmm.
sort of not blame you, but just say, and because I'm comparing myself to you. And so
Hmm.
I ask you, like, what are some of these qualities, not the teachers you have, but you, Reema, like, what
Hmm.
are those qualities that you have carried forward from your teachers, and just just talk about the idea of, instead of projecting.
Hmm.
I see what you put out on some of the new media, and I like it a lot, because, especially recently, because everything is so, there's so much friction and insanity in the world, and talk about sort of finding a place in nature and unplugging, but I just want you to talk about the qualities of teaching that you
Hmm.
believe, and if you've dealt with students that that like you said, it's very black and white. Oh, I don't need a teacher. The books are all available. I can practice all the all the stuff, and I don't. And to me, that strikes of somebody who's a little bit afraid to actually grow and move out of their, and just
Hmm.
become even a bigger person. I just wanted you to talk about
Hmm.
yourself and how you deal, if you do, with that, and some of the qualities that you've tried to bring forward in your work.
Mm. I think one of the most beautiful qualities I've taken from my teachers is just acceptance. Really accepting the people that come into my world as they are and for what they're experiencing. And the perfection is in the honesty. Like even as you share that, you have sometimes these feelings of jealousy arise, or that, to me, that's so beautiful. And there's just this perfection in what you're sharing, that because I can feel that it's true.
Yeah.
And I feel like my teachers received me in that way and actually helped me to look at, more, if you can call it the shadow side, or in yoga we call it kleshas, just because they were so accepting of my wholeness and my fullness, that it's like, oh, okay, you feel anger or jealousy or sadness. That's okay. That's beautiful. That's a part of your healing and your wholeness. So let's look at it. And I feel like that, that gift that they gave me has so much shaped what I've been giving for the past few years, which is, practicing yoga in a way where we can fully embrace and look at our jealousy and anger and sadness, because the way to healing is to look at all of those aspects of ourselves, and we so often just brush those things aside because we want so much just the light and the peace and the bliss and the freedom. So we push all of that aside, but the way I've been practicing yoga and teaching is to, no, actually, let's dig deep into the jealousy and let's really look at what's going on there. And that's how we heal, and that's been my journey of healing and what I've been sharing. And it is by witnessing my teachers do that for me. And it's amazing because it's not in a judgmental way at all. It's just like we have these qualities within us, we have these tendencies within us, and let's dive in and look at them.
I'm trying to articulate this because I love what you said. I think part of with my teachers, they're from Taiwan, and I love them, and they're very but they come from the way that when they receive the Tao and how they've learned to cultivate, it's like there's one path, right? There's it's not a there are certain things, and first of all, they're also teaching us in their second language, so that is always a challenge. Right. But you can feel and you can see that they are clearly authentic people who desperately want to create community and assimilate, and also they know how real it is. And but I don't know. I mean, Reema, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but it's like, the sometimes I just feel that I've received the Tao 10 years ago, and I feel like there are many ways to cultivate outside of what they are saying about the things that you can do to continue on the path, and in my case, it would be when I go to pray, it's like learning the God's names in Chinese, or learning how to count to 1,000 while I'm, bowing at the shrine of Lao Mu, or cleaning the shrine, and yet I'm at a sort of at a point in my life where, I'm sitting here talking to you, but I have this. I feel like there are many ways to cultivate your true nature, and within. Yeah. And I just wanted to ask you, because they come from a more rigid style of the way that they interpret the Tao. Sometimes you get the feeling that even if you have not had as long a period of cultivation, or you believe sincerely and deeply that you have other ways there are other ways to expand your consciousness and to cultivate, you feel like they don't get it, or it's just sort of dismissed, or that you're not as serious a cultivator as other people. And so I just wonder about, and the flip side of that is, hey, if you allow people to come in and say that, for instance, going to see a type of musical performance for me which is instrumental, It's everybody's taking chances. The sounds and the textures are hypnotizing. I can walk out of there and I feel more cleansed and more pure and more. I've cultivated my spirit more than anything I could have done that my teachers have told me to do. That's not to say it's not important. But the flip side is if you let everybody have their own beliefs, then it becomes kind of wishy-washy. Where do you go? How do you deal with it when, do you not just accept people for who they are, but do you believe that there are certain tenets of the type of work that you do that have to be followed? Or are you accepting of everybody's path, regardless of what they feel might give them a direct connection to the divine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way I interpret the yoga teachings is that they're all suggestions. Like so many beautiful practices, and they're suggestions, and ultimately we each create our own way. We practice, we see what resonates with us, we see what works for us. And my interpretation of yoga is that the ancient scriptures, they actually give us that freedom to carve our own path, to create our own practice. There's this here's a bunch of beautiful mantras, here's a series of amazing types of breath work you can do, here's thousands of asanas, postures you can do.
Right.
But ultimately we piece together our own path. And I think there's as many ways to be a yogi as there are yogis, and when I look at the scriptures, actually, I
was going to ask you, where in the
understand.
scripture, point to a scripture. Can you talk about specific scriptures that point to this flexibility or openness?
There's a passage in the Upanishads where it said that believe nothing until you experience it yourself.
I love it.
And there's so much emphasis on personal experience. And there's another line, it's like, I forget exactly, but the message is that, here are these practices, but ultimately you want to experience them in your own being. And the Upanishads, they say, don't even be dependent on these scriptures. We don't be dependent on anything, including these very teachings. We want you to experience truth in your own being. That is the purpose of these practices. The purpose of the movement and the meditation and the breath work is to loosen the blocks in the body and mind so that each individual can experience truth directly. So it's so liberating and it's so empowering. And the teachers that I know, and my grandfather was one of them, there was no dogma or no dependence. It was really just here, I'm going to present you with these practices. They're all suggestions, and practice them really, really well, and practice them properly, and then see what works for you and create your rhythm. What time in the day are you going to practice? Well, here are some suggestions. Sunrise and sunset are the best times, but there's so much that goes into you cultivating your personal practice. Depending, even we can get into Ayurveda, depending on your constitution. Some of us work better in the afternoon. Some of us, our best times are in the morning. Some are in the evening. So it's this whole path of yoga. It's, self-realization, learning about yourself. What times of day work better for you? What types of practices work better for you? And then creating your way. So I see a lot of flexibility in the original teachings. Not even just really my interpretation, but it's pretty blatant. Even a glimpse at the Vedas and the Upanishads, which are the earliest yoga teachings, it becomes very clear that they're free from dogma. And I think that, some teachers become dogmatic but I don't think, at least I can only speak for yoga, but I don't feel like those very dogmatic teachers are really representing the original teaching. Um,
Explain
because
to us.
when
I mean,
I look at, yeah, yeah.
I mean, can you talk about? Because I was just going to say, like, I mean, do you feel like that it's a like within the community of yoga, if you
Hmm.
start talking about use words like blatant, it's obvious,
Hmm.
it's not just me, it's there. But is that a contentious thing? Can it be contentious? Do people would people look at you? Some people would say, "Yeah, I agree with you," but is it? I guess in today's world where
Hmm.
you can just go to your place of truth and find your truth and your facts and what you think is right. I mean, there's every cable channel, I mean, there's just almost too much where you can go and find
Hmm.
your truth. And yet the
Hmm.
Upanishads and these original these original texts spell
Hmm.
out these are just suggestions, no dogma. Is that pretty much understood throughout the community of yoga, or do people? Is that sort of an issue with? I mean, you can't just you can't just have a comfortable conversation about that amongst teachers because somebody might just find that to be way too loose or unstable, or again maybe antithetical to how they've been raised and cultivated.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. And it's not so black and white, and it very much depends on where on the path an individual is, because in the beginning stages, and the beginning stages could be like 10, 15 years, I think it is great to have a teacher who's going to suggest like a very specific practice, a very specific sequence. And even if the student feels resistance, I think it's good to listen to your teacher and do that their particular sequence, their specific practice, perhaps for years. And then, it could take a decade or two, but then it's like you can start to have more flexibility and, start to create your own practice, start to
Right.
do things a little bit differently according to what your experience is. So, for teachers who are quote unquote dogmatic, I couldn't say like I agree or disagree because it so depends on the individual student and where we all are, and then to add complexity to it, it's not linear, so it might be like the first 10, 15 years we study really closely with a teacher that we trust and we do
Right.
their practices, and then we go on our own and experiment, and then maybe 10 years later we want to go back to our teacher and just say, hey, this is my experience, can you help me out and give me some structure, give me some advice, with this breath work or this posture or this sequence, so it's just it's complicated.
What are some of your unique things that you've developed based on the traditions and what your teachers have taught you, but then you sort of have made it your own in your own teachings? Like, what are some of the things that you do
Hmm.
that make it uniquely Reema?
Yeah, one of the things I do is, with my approach to yoga the past 6, 7 years, I really take the approach of looking at our emotions and our thought patterns and giving that like the primary importance. And that is rooted in ancient yoga teachings that, you know, that teach us how powerful our thoughts are. And, the original definition of yoga is mastery over the fluctuations of the mind. And the mind is defined as the storehouse of thoughts and emotions. So we're really mastering our thoughts and emotions in our practice. Why? Because our thoughts have the power to heal us, and they also have the power to bring about disease and imbalance. So one of the what I find fascinating when I look at there's many Upanishads, which are kind of the Vedas are the oldest yoga scriptures, and the Upanishads are the last section of the Vedas.
Right.
So they go back about 3,500 years. I'm just sharing that with your listeners if they're not familiar.
Absolutely.
And so we're going back to these teachings that are, at least 3,000 years old, maybe older. We don't really know how old they are, but some of the Upanishads, they go into the subtle body, and the subtle body is like the energetic body. And so that's like our prana, the energy behind the breath, that's a part of our subtle body. And these yogis have such a intricate understanding of the energetic body. They were able to... I just want to make sure you can hear me.
No, I can hear you now. I couldn't hear you before, but now I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So these early yogis had such a intricate understanding of the energetic body that they have all of these teachings on how specific thought patterns and emotions affect different parts of the energetic body and different parts of the physical body. And I find that really fascinating. So when you know that you're afflicted, for example, with anger, and you know that anger affects the energy centers around the heart and the winds around the heart, then you can do particular sets of yoga postures and breathing exercises to work on the energy centers at the heart. So what I've done with the way I've been teaching yoga is we look at a particular emotion. So if you're afflicted with anger or attachments or jealousy or depression, then there's a specific set of movement and breath work and meditations that we can do for that particular thought or emotion. And I did this for myself because a few years ago I was afflicted with a lot of different emotions and thought patterns that the yogis identified as creating knots in the body. So I kind of came up with these sequences to heal myself and to get through these kinds of emotions myself. And then once they started to work on me, I started to teach them. And so I have a different yoga sequence for each of the major kleshas. Klesha is a Sanskrit word, and it means like a destructive emotion or a mind poison. And the major kleshas are attachment, anger, fear, anxiety, depression, shame. So I did all of this research and, looked at how each of these emotions affect the energetic body and the gross body and created sequences for them. And that's pretty much how I practice and teach for the past, 5-6 years. And it's been great for me and my students and exciting to bring this dimension of yoga to the world. Focusing on the
I think I'm gonna need some of that that work because that help because those are even this morning I really got angry at my younger daughter and before school was just really volcanic and like really and part of me justified it in my own mind because she wasn't listening and she hadn't been listening. And it was just like, I was exhausted. It was 6:30 and I just really became, and my older daughter was like trying to, walk me back. But I had really become like a different, I just had, everything you're talking about is like stuff I really still fall short in a lot. And, and I understand it's part of life. And sometimes, having an argument or a fight, it can show that you care to a degree. But did you have situations where, you would be able to, in the moment that it's happening, did things that you sort of quote unquote invented, came up, your own techniques, were you able to stop in the moment and control it, or was it, especially early on when you were having mind poison or anger, whatever your things were? That's my issue. Is like I can come back home and do tai chi and clear my head,
Right.
or whatever, like pull weeds from the garden, whatever, but it's in that
Yeah.
moment. Like,
Yeah.
were you able to recognize in the moment and be able to, it's hard for me to envision me being able to do some sort of mantra or poses or just something in the moment that would allow me to not have some
Right.
sort of eruption, especially because we have to get to school.
Oh, sure. No, I mean, in those moments, it's like if you can even get one deep breath in before
Right, right.
the reaction, it's like you get a prize. It's like, that's amazing. If you can get three breaths in, that's incredible.
Wow.
You
Three
know,
breath.
so
Okay, that's really good. Yeah.
yeah, because it's hard. I mean, it's easy to practice, on a mat or on a cushion, but life is our greatest challenge, and our greatest teacher. And those heated moments when you're about to lose it, and yes, I have many times, just to get a couple deep breaths in before we react is huge, and I think that's what our practices, that's one of the gifts that they give us, that pause between when we're triggered and we respond, that pause becomes bigger the more we practice, and I've
Hmm.
definitely where I wasn't able to pause, like I was too heated or too triggered, but everything I teach, I practice, and I practice because I need to, because I do have those moments, and I do notice that it gets better, like the ability to, you know, receive someone even when they're being very difficult, and the ability to pause before reacting. We It gets better with practice,
Right.
you know.
You would
And,
say that there was a
and
time
that's
when, yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was just going to say that's for me. That's when it's like, and maybe it's because I've been exposed to these practices for so long. I give myself a lot of liberty, like what works for me. Like maybe I'll focus on mantra for a while and let myself cool down, or I'll get my yoga mat out and do 10 minutes of practice, like physical practice. But I think that's the gift of the yogis. They gave us so many options. They gave us so many practices that ultimately we can choose from. But
Uh,
you were saying,
Yeah, I mean, I can you talk about, like, have you ever disappointed anybody in your life?
yes,
Can you talk
yes,
about, like, because I just wonder, you came from a family of yogis, but you were on this pretty intense path to do international relations at the UN, and I just I'm just curious about, like, how you dealt, if at all, with when you decided to go back to the teachings that you were raised with, and maybe didn't know at the time you were going to make a career out of it, but you walked away from such a logical Western, or just a logical path in our society where there's uh, you know uh, gravitas, and there's so much sort of like it's about status to a degree, and
hmm
going to all these great schools and working so hard to get to some point, and then just basically, what was the reason you, and the really the larger question about disappointment is just the idea of how did you navigate how people, especially people close to you, maybe not your family, but how people close to you judged you or said she's lost her mind, she's walked away from this insanely great. What is she doing?
Yeah.
I want you to just talk about what, and was there like a real tangible reason? I mean, 9/11. That happened, but
Hmm.
I mean, outside of actually being like in the I'm just wondering if there was a definitive reason why you decided to walk away from such a logical existence.
Yeah. It was like building up since I was a kid, and just observing, one thing, like just how the opportunities women have in India and in my culture, just seeing my grandmothers, um, and being sensitive to the, the choices that women have, and feeling this divide between the philosophy of yoga and culture and real life, And like I would hear my grandfather talk about the yoga philosophy and how we're all full of potential, and, we're living in this boundless world, and we're boundless beings, and, there's so much possibility and all this beautiful philosophy. But then I would see how some of the people around me, especially women, didn't really have, there were so many blocks.
Right.
And and I felt that sensitivity as a child. And then, even though I lived a lot of my life in the United States, I was still affected by the culture, and there was so many things I felt like, maybe I couldn't do or I shouldn't do. And I felt those limitations, and maybe because I grew up with yoga, I started to get really fascinated with other spiritual traditions. And I've always enjoyed reading about, other traditions and different types of spirituality. And I remember reading a book about Celtic philosophy. And I read this line, and I don't know if I can say it back exactly, but it was something like to the effect that cultures and societies breed imitation and conformity, whereas spirit longs to express its uniqueness. And I read that, and I think that was a huge turning point
Dude,
for
that's a
me.
huge turning point right now when you just said that. I love that line.
Yeah, right. It just summarized my life.
Exactly.
Because just even growing up, I was always drawn to music, and I was playing the piano and singing, and experimenting with lots of instruments, to the point where when I went to college, I wanted to major in music.
Really?
And
Wow.
that was just like, yeah. And I didn't even know, but Vassar, where I did my undergrad, it actually has one of the top like music departments in the country. And where I would go to the music building, and it was just every music room had a Steinway grand. And I was just like, what is going on? Like, where am I? This is amazing. And at that time in my life, I was very passionate about the piano, and I just loved playing. And I had a teacher at Vassar that I really wanted to major in music. And, even though I came from a family of yogis, my parents worked really hard to leave India and come to the United States and give my brother and I opportunities. So for them, they were like very happy for me to have this passion for music, but they really wanted me to become a doctor and have, a profession where I didn't have to worry about money, because they did growing up.
Right.
So,
Right.
so there were so many different forces, and everyone around me, all the Indian kids around me, they were becoming doctors and lawyers. And I was actually pre-med for the first 2 years of college.
But you were a
Because
free spirit, and you were not going to conform.
Yeah, I tried to conform. I was pre-med for 2 years, and then I chose international affairs, because I felt like I could get a solid job and make a career out of it. And then it was like 9/11 was a big turning point for me because at that point, I had already experienced almost 2 decades of life where I was, connected to my spirit, but not necessarily. I didn't get that message
Right,
that,
right.
to let to express it, to like live a life where I'm expressing my spirit rather than, conforming to what is expected of me. And I think because I saw how hard my parents work, I didn't want to let them down. I wanted it's almost a lifetime to move. It takes almost a lifetime to move from one side of the world to the other and create a life for your children. So they gave so much, and I didn't want to let them down. And I knew I would let them down if I said, no, I'm going to just major in music and do what I want. So
I love it. I think it's so. Wait, hold on for a second though. But I mean, some people would say, including maybe your parents, and your mom, that I mean, we moved here so that that women wouldn't have blocks, so to speak. That you'd have these opportunities that women can't have in India. And I just wonder if you realized at a certain point at the UN or in certain places that, yeah, there were still, it was different kinds of blocks. It wasn't as overt, maybe. It was more covert, but that
yeah.
whatever you thought or whatever was indicative of the system in India as it related to fairness or the boundless, as you say, the boundless opportunities for men, but not necessarily women, if that actually existed in your profession, because because that it's a twofold question, because was that in fact the case at the is there in fact, I don't know what the right word is, maybe sexism or sort of that job can't be done by a woman. Does that exist there? And also, like, over time, how did your parents learn to, if they had to, learn to, they knew you were always a free spirit and just hoped that you would conform. But then over time, I guess maybe the point is did they always respect you no matter what? Or was there a period where you had to basically, when they saw how sincere you were about yoga and about this path, did they then open their heart to you again? Because I would just assume that I know a lot of parents from different cultures, I mean, they just, if their kids are like us, then they're just like aliens, or they're misunderstood, and it creates a lot of friction. And I just wonder how they came, if they came around to your true nature.
Yeah, it was a process. I think in the beginning, they were disappointed and unhappy about my choice to leave the UN and pursue yoga full time. And this was also, 20 years ago, so yoga wasn't as popular as it is now.
Absolutely.
So many people are making a career out of it.
I mean, I can't tell you how many football players are doing yoga now. It's insane. Yeah, go ahead, continue.
Oh yeah, it's blown up.
Yeah,
for sure.
Totally.
It took time. It took at least a few years for my parents to really embrace, my decision, and I think it was just through observation. Like, luckily, I was very blessed on the path, because the truth is I was scared too, to leave my job and
absolutely. I mean, it takes so much. But what was so I don't know what the right word is. Why did you know it was the right thing to do?
I think it honestly, it goes back to the pain of 9/11, like that.
Explain that exactly. I mean, what now? So were you at the trades? I mean, because I was in Long Island. I mean, it was a really. What did it change your view of? Were you being too Pollyannish about the world? I mean, it was obviously a seismic event that hopefully will never
Right.
be repeated. But I mean, to leave such a, I don't want to say regal, but I mean, you just sort of, I mean, you look like, again, just on the surface, you could have been an ambassador. I mean, you could have been like some kind of, you know, had some beautiful. Again, it's not what you wanted, but what was it about that incident that fundamentally had you shift everything? Because I mean, it wasn't like you were in the. Thank God you weren't in the trade centers. I don't think. I mean, maybe I don't know. I mean, talk about it.
No, I wasn't. But part of it was my experience at the UN. Like I feel like the UN does a lot of good work in the world, and it depends on the people you're working with closely. Or for my specific job and department, I felt like I was actually working with like special events and working on communication and journals, and I felt like I was kind of caught up with the side of the UN where it felt kind of like a show.
Right. Exactly. I dig. I get it. Yeah.
And these are the pamphlets, and everything looks so pretty from the outside. But like, what is actually happening? Like, what changes are we actually bringing to the world? And even doing some research in India at the policy level, I just, even when policies change, I felt like it's so hard to really make a shift in people's lives. And I went back to some of the core teachings of yoga, which are actually seen in spiritual traditions all over the world, which is this idea that, the outer world is a reflection of the inner. And there's violence in the world because there's violence in my mind. And, as yogis, we take so much responsibility for the world that we're experiencing. And I felt really inspired to go inwards and like work on the violence in my mind and, work on the afflictions in my mind. And it felt like, I don't know, by the time 9/11 happened, it was just like, I felt like this desperation to do that kind of work because it's just too painful out here in the world.
I have to ask you, it's profound. It's profound because 99 out of 100 cats would conform like every other good conformist would. It's so profoundly impressive and beautiful. Did you believe that the madness that you were feeling about the lack of impact you could have at that level, if you stayed in that field, profession, it would only get exacerbated?
I just felt like
Or maybe here's the better question. You really felt that you could have a much more seismic, as I said before, you are somebody I can just feel. You affect one person, that has a ripple effect out. The vibrational impact is unquantifiable. You've been doing that dozens of times a week for years. You just believed intrinsically your impact on the world based on the traditions that you were raised under would be better suited yogically than in the UN, or do you really believe that? And how many people are trapped in that madness, do you think, that they go along with this stuff, wanting to make a difference in the world, realizing it's fruitless, and yet they're getting such a big paycheck and they have all this esteem and status, and they can't walk away from it? I know it's a lot. I'm sorry to throw all this stuff at you.
Ask me the question one more time.
Yeah, here's the question. Here's the reality is this: when you recognized that there was a desperation, it was an urgency to shift at that point.
Yeah.
Because I'm asking, because you felt that if you continued in this line, that the desperation and angst and madness would only be exacerbated.
Well, I felt that there was so much, also, of course, there was so much anger after 9/11 and, fear about terrorism and all of that. And with that, I also went back to the yoga teachings just to, instead of just getting quick to anger, just really like considering like how unhappy must these terrorists be to go to, to do this, and just like getting sensitive to how it's like ultimately it's our own unhappiness inside that leads to such huge catastrophes.
Absolutely.
And so, of course, I wanted to work on that within myself, but to ultimately help others look at our own sadness and unhappiness, and work at that level to avoid such huge trauma in the world. And I can't speak for, I do believe that there are a lot of people at the UN that are doing good work, but it became clear to me that that was my path, to go inwards and to work at that level of our own minds and healing our own traumas so that we can avoid this kind of pain. And it was like a dual it wasn't just me deciding that. I think that life like opened up to me in ways that reinforced my decision, because again, I was scared myself when I left my job, and I left the city that had become my home, my friends, my apartment, and it was all terrifying. Yeah, I had that courage to do it, but I was scared.
It's so, what a beautiful story. Hey, we have like 20 minutes, is that right? Until you have to go?
Yeah, I share one more thing just to show that it wasn't just my decision.
Oh, go ahead, please. Please.
What happened is I was feeling so drawn back to the yoga teachings and practices that what I did, I decided to actually gift myself a 1-month training, a yoga training at the studio in San Francisco. And at that time I didn't know, like, am I really going to is this going to be my life, my career, my future? I didn't know. It was a question mark, but I at least decided to give myself that gift of that month. And what happened after that month is the studio owner offered me a full-time job.
Jeez.
To bring yoga philosophy.
Gosh, man, you must have been the best student around. How does that happen?
Well, the training that I did was actually 99% yoga postures. And for me personally, that was fine, because growing up, yoga poses were the part of yoga we focused on the least. So I was fine to have that focus. But at the end of that month, I wrote a letter to the head of the school, and I said, "Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed your training. I loved it. I just was wondering, have you ever thought about including mantra and music and philosophy and cooking and Ayurveda, all of these other aspects of yoga into your studio?" And so the next day he asked me to come to lunch with him, and he offered me a job. And I honestly didn't write that letter looking for a job. I was just kind of innocently asking. And
you never implied that you could do that, even though you could.
No,
wow.
No, and even when he offered me the job, I said, "Well, we're living in, this is San Francisco. I'm sure there's scholars, yoga scholars. I can help you find someone." And he just insisted. He said, "No, I want you to do this. I want you to bring this to my studio." And so it was like, I think of that saying that you take one step towards spirit and spirit takes 100 steps towards you.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like my life felt like that. Like I took that one step to leave my job and do this training, and then life just offered me this job like 1 month later. And so it was like the universe was meeting me,
right.
Right. And that kept happening. Like the last 20 years, I can share 10 stories how that every couple of years that kept happening. Like doors just kept opening. And
what's the most tell me another one.
Tell you another one.
Yeah.
Well, 2 years after, or just a year and a half after working at this yoga studio in San Francisco, that curiosity came back to me about other spiritual traditions.
Right.
And because I grew up with yoga and I was happy to go back and deepen my experience in it and start teaching. But I was so familiar with yoga, I was just like, how do other people connect with spirit? Like that question started to percolate in my being. And I shared it with my boss at this yoga studio in San Francisco. And I shared with him that I really want to explore this. And I'm not sure I can even stay working full time for you because I feel so curious, And just like a few days later, a friend of his came through town who was going to Brazil. And I ended up getting invited to go to Brazil and experience the spiritual traditions in the Amazon. And that was just, again, like the universe answering my inquiry.
Wait, okay, hold on for a second. That's profound. Well, first of all, that also speaks to the idea of people following their path or their spirit. And look, that's such a special... But I mean, like, I don't, let's, what was the Amazon thing? I mean, that stuff always gets shrouded in like ayahuasca and this, that, and like, I just picture this jungle with birds of paradise and like, what is that tradition? What did you take away from that tradition?
Well, it was extremely eye-opening for me. I spent about a month about 3.5 weeks or so in the Amazon, and I realized that we are as humans, we're so quick to label things, like label.
Oh my
yoga.
God! Don't even get me started. Honestly, they were like, "Oh, you're a jazz journalist." I'm like, "No, it's all music." They want to pigeonhole you. But go ahead.
Well, exactly. And when I went to the Amazon, everything that we did was like a mirror of what we do in yoga. It's like we ate really healthy, light food, even dieting, which is, and yoga fasting is a big part of the practice. We sang so many songs that helped us to relax and open ourselves up, which of course in yoga, singing and songs are a huge part of the practice. We did a lot of just like breathing, slow, deep breathing, which was to me similar to pranayama. Even movement, like not so much in mainstream yoga, but in other movement traditions. Like I grew up with Indian folk dances where we dance in a circle, and it's like rhythmic, steady movement that helps us to steady the mind. And
I'd love to do some of that. I mean, I think I do my own version of that, but go ahead.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the Amazon, we were doing these circular dances that were almost like exactly like the folk dances I've done in India. And so I was just like, we call ourselves yogis or shamans or this practice or that practice, but we're all doing the same thing. And the shamans that I spent time with, they were so humble and beautiful, and they were as curious about me as I was about them. So we would sing all these songs, these traditional Amazonian songs. And then often the shaman would ask me, like, could you sing a couple songs from your tradition? And it was just like a beautiful exchange. And yeah, I just came back, it just hit me. And we hear this all the time, that we're all the same and we're all doing similar practices. But I was like, we really, at the heart of it, we really are all doing similar practices. And even the philosophies of oneness, are not unique to yoga. They're all over the world. And so it just...
I guess maybe the it's amazing that I'm actually wrapping up. We can finalize the story here, but it's like, you recognize that because your craving was to find out how other people tap into spirit. And so you were able to see how people access spirit outside of your own. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Tradition. Yes. Mm-hmm. Like what kind of practices do other people use? I was curious. And then I realized they were very similar.
Right.
The specific form is different. Of course, we have a different sequence of movement or different songs, but the fact that we're all moving and singing and breathing and dieting and fasting, on the base level, it was all very similar.
There's a clip, an audio clip I wanted to play for you from one of my interviews. It's a little bit, it's a few minutes long, and then we'll come back because I feel very called to play this for you right now. So take a listen, and then
Oh,
we'll come back.
thank you.
I had been seeking for years, ever since when I first started playing bass in 1962, or at least a couple of years after that, and why I was playing music. What was the reason for it? Because it wasn't enough for me just to have fun and enjoy it. I wanted to. I wanted to know why I was playing, and what prefaced that was there a God that created us all? Was this, what was my life all about? So I started investigating and pursuing, reading different books and just talking to people and to find out if there really was a God. And I became confused by man's opinions. I became confused by the vanity and by egos and just the intellectualism and the way we do to try to puff ourselves up and make ourselves important in life, that power. And so I just start praying. And it says, if there really is a God, reveal yourself to me and make yourself known. I can't deal with the intellectualism. Everything's becoming just too perfect and precise, and too much vanity and ego. And so if you're there, reveal yourself to me. So slowly but surely, the Lord started revealing and making things clear to me. And on this path, part of the process was finding out why I was playing music. What's the reason for this? I thought, well, if there is a God, then that God created music. If there is a God, then that God created me and put the desire in me to play music and gave me the love for music. So I thought, well, my first responsibility then would be to find out if there is a God. It made sense to me. It's like going to the very root, of it all. So that was my first.
You did it on your own, though. You were.
Yes, I did this on my own.
Yeah,
right.
It's very beautiful.
I didn't want to belong to a group and be under the religiosity and the traditions of the church, and it just gets bogged down with bureaucracy.
No, I really dig it. I dig it so much.
I wasn't interested in that. Anyways, in answer to your question, I had to preface my answer to your question a little bit, just give you a little background. But
sure.
There was a two issue of 2 issues of Cadence magazine from 2005. I think it was the May and the June issue that William Minor did like a 7-8 hour interview with me in New York. And there was so much information, Cadence had to bring out a 2-part interview. And I talk a lot about this in that article in Cadence. There was a coffee house I had called Selah in Portland, Oregon, back in the 70s. And I had been living on a farm prior to that. I moved from Seattle to a farm in Woodland, Washington, and so I drove a tractor for a year, planted seeds to raise hay that we used to feed the cattle. It was a cattle ranch. It was my dad and his brother's ranch. And so my wife and my son Scotty and Davy, we only had 2 kids at that time, lived on the farm for a year. And I was driving a tractor, and one day this plan for a puppet show. When I was a young kid in grade school, I had puppet shows for the kids, and I would do these little puppet shows. So I hadn't thought about this for years. I'm driving a tractor, and all of a sudden into my mind pops a plan to make a puppet house for puppet shows. And all the plans came into my mind. I went down to the lumber yard and bought all the things I thought I needed. I had written nothing down. Actually, when I finished making this puppet house, I had like a 6-inch piece of 2x4 left. So I actually got just the right amount of wood. It was a puppet house that you could stand up in. It had a folding roof. It was a collapsible, and it was painted purple and yellow and some other colors. It was really bright. It was for kids. And when I finished it, my wife says, "What are you going to do with this?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I guess put it in the barn. I have no use for it." At that time. So I put it in the barn. A couple of years later, I was hunting for a place to have a coffee house, like the Longland in Seattle. And to make a long story short, I found a place. I was a lawyer in town that owned this building that was full of junk. He says, "If you can clear this out, you can." He says, "I'll just give it to you rent free, and you can go to my lumber yard and charge whatever you want, and fix it up, and you can just have it rent free. I'll let you use it." So I got a junker to come and take out all the junk, and as a reward, I gave him like 2 or 3 oak tables, antiques that were in the place, and he cleared everything out. And then I spent a year on my own tearing down a wall and putting up a ceiling. I worked in there for a year to get this place together. And when I had the stage finally built, I says, "Oh, I'll have puppet shows for the kids on Saturday afternoons." And when I brought the puppet house and put it on the stage, it fit perfectly. It was just 6 inches shy of hitting the top of the ceiling. It was just perfect.
Wow.
Perfect. So then I said, "Oh yeah, then that's why I built that puppet house." And so I had this thing for the kids, and the shows behind the dialogue, I'd have Coltrane or Miles playing underneath the dialogue, so there was always jazz playing. And it was a coffee house that was free for people. They had a donation box, and people could come in, and I'd have my group in there playing on Friday nights started at like 1 in the morning till about 4 or 5. And it was isolated, so it didn't disturb the neighbors or anything.
Reema, I want to read you, the story goes on, but I want to read you the ending part of it, because you got the majority. That was a guy named David Friesen, who's an amazing double bass player, but he said,
Okay.
He said, "In that coffee house, I would plan my puppet shows for the following Friday. One day I was in the midst of writing the script, and I saw this vision. It wasn't a vision with everything outside of me, where everything outside of me changed. It was a vision inside, but it was very real. I saw this color pool, a beautiful pool filled with all these colors. It's difficult to describe the colors because they were spiritual colors. They weren't reds, yellows, and blues like we see here on earth. I saw the Lord dip in a ladle and let these colors flow out. I asked the Lord, 'What is this?' He answered, 'This is a color pool that I've given you to fill the note.' He went on to tell me to fill the musical note with substance. The substance is my love, and I want you to go forth and show the glory of the kingdom of God, not for your glory and not from your power, but from my glory and my power." And, I appreciate you sitting through that. I wanted you to talk about, Reema, the thing about you is that your aura is very strong, and you have a very bright light, because you obviously don't just talk. You, like you said, you practice what you teach, and then you implement it. And so the word is authenticity. But I wanted you to just talk about this color pool, this idea of spiritual colors, and the idea of when you really recognized the God within you.
Yeah, I think I feel like God gave each of us life to express our uniqueness. I feel that for myself, but I feel that for everybody. that we all were born with something unique to add to this web of life that we're all connected to. And so when you earlier were talking about some of the rigidity of spiritual practice, I really see that all as suggestions and things we can, use, learn about, and practice and use to cultivate our own path. But and all of these spiritual practices, I feel like the purpose of them is for us to touch that uniqueness inside of us so that we can give it back to the world. And I feel like if we each did that, this web that connects us, we'll get stronger. And,
Do you believe that
hard.
do you believe that I mean, I don't believe in coincidences. Do you believe that going to San Francisco, writing a note, so innocently, being given a job, taking your true path instead of conforming, do you believe God, those types of synergistic things that go beyond the laws of probability, is that God at work? What is the concept of I just feel like I agree with what you're saying. I'm trying to, when you look at some of that information, when you are you're curious about something's swelling up inside of you, you want to learn more about it, boom, you're in the Amazon. Is that God's work?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think God is always doing things like that for us. But the question more is, are we receptive? Are we open? Do we have enough fight inside to see? Because I think God is in all of these people. God was that person who said, "You're welcome to join me at the Amazon." And God was that person who gave me a job at the yoga studio. We have God all around us. And I think it's more, are we receptive?
Well, Reema, can we? I didn't get to some stuff I wanted to say. Can we do another set in a couple weeks?
Okay.
Is that good?
Sure.
Okay, beautiful. And I just wanted to say thank you. You left me feeling really. You filled me with a lot of spirit today and a lot of hope, and I know that you go about your life on a day-to-day basis doing that. But I just wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate where you've come from and the decisions that you've made, and I'm not surprised that you are where you are today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I know these hours just fly by.
Well, you know what it is? It's like when you're talking to somebody, you're just swatting away my questions with ease, but at the same time, it's like when you're talking to somebody who applies what they teach, then it makes for, I don't know, I understand very clearly what you say. You articulate things very well, and yet you're able to talk about the things that that you've been working on for a long time, and it just gives me a lot of hope that that we can all get to a place like that, because I guess that's what I'm striving for, and I just really appreciate your teaching and your wisdom, because it's like it just feels right. So, and anyway, go pick up your daughter and go have a beautiful day and treat yourself very well.
Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to share and to talk with you. So thank you for the opportunity.
Take care, Reema.
You too.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Such an honor to be able to connect with Reema Datta, phenomenal teacher, musician, and inspiration to the world. Let's hope we can heed her advice, move towards our true nature, and if it's in the right zone, then God will fill that void. That's all for now. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you later.